The night came heavy over Dust Creek. Lanterns swayed in the windows of the saloon, their glow flickering against warped glass. A storm brewed low on the horizon, yet the real thunder was already inside the town. Sheriff Amos Wyatt stood in the center of Main Street, boots planted firm in the dust. His badge, dulled by years of sun and grit, still caught what little moonlight cut through the clouds. Across from him, shadows shifted. A dozen men, drunk on whiskey and vengeance, moved as one restless tide. They wanted blood, and they wanted it fast. Wyatt's hand hovered near the worn grip of his revolver. He wasn't young anymore. His joints ached. His breath came shorter than it used to. But Dust Creek had been his duty for 20 years, and he'd be damned if tonight was the end of it. From the saloon porch, townsfolk whispered in uneasy tones. Some clutched children close, others peered over shoulders, waiting to see whether law or chaos would claim the night. One outlaw stepped forward, broad-shouldered, scar slicing down his cheek. Riker. He wasn't the worst man to ride into Dust Creek, but he was the loudest. His voice cut through the silence. "Sheriff, you've stood too long in the way of folks making their own justice. Step aside, or fall aside." Wyatt's jaw tightened. He could see the mob behind Riker miners, drifters, ranch hands with too much drink and too little sense. A wildfire of rage ready to burn the town hollow. "I swore an oath," Wyatt said, his voice carrying like a church bell in the emptiness. "You boys think you've got justice in your pockets, but it's just whiskey and hate. If you're set on burning Dust Creek down, you'll do it over my body." A hush fell. Even the wind seemed to wait. Then gunfire. A crack of lightning, but born of lead. Wyatt staggered. The echo rolled down Main Street, bouncing between wooden walls. His hat tipped, fell into the dust. Gasps, screams. A child cried out. The sheriff clutched his chest, knees buckling, and in the lantern light his figure slumped, one hand outstretched as though still trying to hold the line. The mob surged forward. Some laughed, others looked stunned. Riker didn't smile. He knew what had just broken was bigger than one man, and in the shadows near the edge of town, a different figure stepped into the lamplight. A man with a long coat, brim pulled low, revolver at his side. An outlaw, yes, but not with the mob. His name was Eli Cutter, a drifter, a wanted man in half the counties of the frontier. Yet he stood still, watching the sheriff fall, the mob roaring louder, the town trembling. The lawman had gone down, and now, whether he liked it or not, the outlaw would have to choose ride with the mob or stand against them. Eli Cutter didn't move at first. The mob's cheer rose and broke like a wave, men shoving past one another, boots thudding on the boards as they spilled from porches to street. Someone whooped, someone else yelled to fetch kerosene. The saloon piano went silent, as if even ivory had sense enough to keep quiet. Eli stepped forward. The brim of his hat cut a clean crescent through the lamplight. His coat brushed his boots with that soft whisper that makes a man sound bigger than his bones. He knelt beside Sheriff Amos Wyatt and set 2 fingers to the man's throat. There was no pulse, only the heat leaving a life that had stood too long between wild hearts and bad choices. The crowd pressed closer. Riker shouldered to the front, breathing hard, anger flashing like steel struck on stone. "Don't you touch him, Cutter," Riker snapped. "That's the law, and the law ain't yours." Eli looked up, eyes pale as winter creek water. "No, it ain't yours either." For a heartbeat, the men hesitated, the way cattle will pause when a rider lifts his hand and the horse beneath him squares up. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it speaks low and expects to be obeyed. Eli slid his arm beneath the sheriff's shoulders and eased the body to the boardwalk. Someone set the fallen hat beside him. Dust clung to the brim like fine ash. From the saloon doorway, a woman stepped out, shawl tight around her shoulders, hair pinned against the wind. Martha Wyatt folks knew her by name because the sheriff said it soft when he ordered coffee, and because she served others before herself without keeping tally. She didn't cry. She looked at Eli, then at the men with bottles and torches and too much courage, and the sorrow in her eyes was a steady thing. "Mrs. Wyatt," Eli said, voice gentle in a throat trained to roughness, "I'll see him to your porch. You'll see him to the church." She answered, steady as a ledger line. "The porch is where he kissed me goodbye this morning. I need that to stay the last thing." Eli nodded. He lifted the sheriff with the care a man gives a heavy book he never learned to read but knows he ought to respect. Two boys ran to open the doors of the small, whitewashed church down the lane. Lanterns swung. The town breathed like one animal, spooked and unsure which way to bolt. Behind him, Riker's voice rose. This town tried justice the gentle way. It failed. The mine foreman steals. The banker cheats. The railroad cuts wages. We asked Wyatt to take our side. He took no side. Well, the middleman's down now. Time to choose. Eli laid the sheriff on a pew at the front, folded the man's hands, and slid the badge from his vest. He studied the dented metal in the church's lantern glow, the way a relic might look to a man trying to remember faith. Footsteps in the aisle. The preacher, grey as fence wood, cleared his throat. "You aim to pin that on yourself, son?" "Not yet," Eli said, and the word yet sounded like a door half open on a dark room. Outside, glass shattered. A bottle rolled to a stop against the threshold and leaked a thin amber line, like a snake of fire waiting to be told where to strike. Eli walked back into the street. "Riker," he called. The mob turned. Riker wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and grinned. "Cutter. Last I heard, Dodge wants you for a stage job, and 2 ranchers swear you took their calves." "Last I heard," Eli said, "you borrowed from a banker and paid with other folks' fear." The grin went stiff. Men, especially, men with a crowd behind them, don't like being read aloud in public. "You with us or not?" Riker asked. "Sheriff's out. Law's a rumor. We'll clear this town of vermin by morning. Banker first. Then the foreman. Then the men who hid in their houses while we hanged for their bread." He jerked his chin toward the church. "Unless you want to defend the dead." Eli looked down Main Street. The general store's windows were dark. The bank sat squat, a box on a box, smug as a fat cat. On the ridge beyond town, the storm flickered like a warning lantern. Martha Wyatt stood on the church steps. A boy, freckled, hat too big for his head, sidled up to Eli and tugged his sleeve. "Mr. Cutter," he whispered, "my pa says you once shot a rattler out of a man's boot without scratching a toe." Eli considered the child's face, the hopeful lie hanging between them like a prayer flag. "Your pa tells stories. Will you stop 'em?" the boy asked, eyes cutting toward Riker's men. "That depends," Eli said, "on who they are." A quiet settled under the noise, the way silence will grow roots if you give it room. Eli stepped into the center of Main Street, exactly where the sheriff had stood. He planted his boots. Dust curled around his heels, wanting to erase what had been there and write something new. "Listen close," he said, voice steady, not loud. "A mob is a thing with many hands and one brain that never learned its letters. If you're here to settle honest scores, hold your anger in both hands and say the names plain. If you're here to burn for the pleasure of burning, walk away. I'll count to 10. If you're still holding a bottle after that, I'll consider it a weapon." Riker barked a laugh. "You ain't the sheriff." "No," Eli said, and let the badge catch a lick of moonlight from his palm. "I'm the man between you and a fire you'll spend the rest of your lives paying for." He tucked the badge into his coat pocket without pinning it. The gesture hit the men like a fresh gust, not law, but something near to it, something older, the kind that rides with a man's name. "One," Eli said. Bottles wavered. A miner swallowed hard and lowered his arm. Another man followed, as if his bones suddenly remembered a morning he'd promised his daughter he'd build her a porch swing when autumn came. "Two," A ranch hand set his jug on the ground. His eyes shone wet. "I just want my wages," he muttered. 3, 4. Glass clinked as a pair of brothers exchanged a look that said they'd done enough stupid for one night. Riker's jaw worked. He lifted his own bottle, daring Eli to make him put it down. Lightning stitched the horizon, and the storm's belly grumbled. 5, 6. A figure slipped from the bank's alley, a thin man with the pinched face of someone who thought rent was a sacrament. Mr. Harlan, the banker. He held his hands up like a prisoner who thinks confession might count as armor. "Gentlemen," he said, voice high, "let's not—" A rock flew and burst against the bank sign. Harlan flinched back. 7, Eli said, eyes on Riker. 8. Riker didn't blink. He took a swig and spat into the dust. 9, Eli said, and the word felt like the cock of a hammer. Then a shot cracked far end of the street, not aimed at anyone, just a noise loosed by fear. The crowd jumped. Someone stumbled. A lantern rocked and fell from a porch rail, spilling fire that licked hungrily along dry boards. Eli moved like a man who'd already pictured this moment 100 times. He kicked the lantern wide, scattering flame into harmless threads, then snapped his gaze back to the crowd. 10. The last bottle in Riker's fist hung there, a dare suspended in the breath between choices. Men watched him the way they watch a fuse on a long piece of dynamite. Interested, afraid, a little hopeful. Riker smiled slowly and smashed the bottle at his boots. The scent of whiskey rose, sweet as a lie. "We decided, Cutter," he said softly. "You ain't in charge." Eli's fingers settled on the worn grip of his revolver. Not to pull yet, only to remind his hand what it knew. From the church steps Martha's voice carried, clear as a bell that's seen both weddings and funerals. "Cole Riker," she called, "if you start this, you finish it with me looking you in the eye. You want to build your new town over my husband's body, you say it plain." Riker turned, and the mask slipped. For an instant he looked like a boy who'd broken a window and suddenly remembered he lived in that house too. Eli took that breath, that fragile, precious beat when wolves sometimes remember they were pups beside a warm stove. He stepped into it. "Here's how it goes," he said. "We hold court at sunup in the church. We name wrongs and set 'em straight, with witnesses and a tally. No fire. No rope. If you think you're the tempter and the judge both, you try me now." He let the word now hang like a bell note over a quiet graveyard. "Or you sleep on it, and maybe you wake up a man instead of a match." The storm answered with a low roll, nearer this time. Men glanced at the dark. The mob, that many-handed thing, felt around for a brain. Riker's smile came back thinner. "Sun up, then," he said. "And if we don't like the court, we'll hold our own." "You've had your chance to speak," Eli said. "You'll get another at dawn." The men drifted, restless, muttering, like cattle that decide for now to stay in the fence. Riker tipped 2 fingers off his hat and backed away into the alley shadow, eyes never leaving Eli's. Martha stepped down, the shawl lifted by a wind that smelled of rain and old wood. "You took a risk," she said. "Only the kind that comes due anyway," Eli answered. She looked at his coat pocket where the badge lay heavy. "Are you wearing it at dawn?" Eli stared at the church door, at the pew where Sheriff Wyatt rested, at the empty space in the street where the hat had fallen into the dust. He didn't answer, because the night still had one more turn to take, and on the ridge a lantern blinked twice once, then again, as if someone out there was signaling the town below, or warning it. The wind carried the smell of wet sage, and a promise that nothing would look the same in the morning. The lantern flickered again, once, twice. Then darkness. Eli Cutter narrowed his eyes at the ridgeline. Outlaw's new signals. 2 blinks wasn't a farmer hunting strays or a preacher praying for rain. It was a message, sharp as a knife in the dark. Someone up there was waiting, watching, and ready. The mob had scattered enough to look like law-abiding citizens again, each man dragging his shadow back home. Yet Riker's grin lingered in the alley like a ghost, and Eli knew men like Cole didn't sleep easy when they thought they had the upper hand. The storm groaned closer. Thunder rolled low, its weight pressing against the rooftops. Dust Creek smelled of wet dust, kerosene, and the sharp tang of fear. Martha Wyatt still stood on the church steps, her shawl caught in the restless wind. "You saw it too," she said. Eli tipped his chin once. "Lanterns don't blink on their own." The boy with freckles crept up again, hat sliding down to his ears. "Pa says the ridge is haunted," he whispered, eyes wide. "Not ghosts," Eli said, voice flat. "Men." Martha's hand tightened on the shawl. "More of Riker's kind." "Or worse," Eli answered. He turned, scanning the street. The saloon doors flapped with the gust, spilling yellow light and the sour smell of whiskey. A fiddle struck up timidly inside, as though pretending the night hadn't broken something that couldn't be mended. Eli walked to the sheriff's fallen hat where it lay in the dust. He picked it up, brushed the grit off the brim with his thumb, and set it on the hitching rail outside the church. It wasn't his to wear. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it belonged where eyes could see it, a reminder. From behind him came the shuffle of boots. The preacher, thin and weary, stepped out of the church door. His voice was low, but steady. "If there are men on that ridge, they'll be down here by dawn. Court or no court." Eli's gaze stayed on the dark horizon. "Then I'll meet them, one way or another." Inside the saloon, laughter burst too loud, forced like men whistling past a graveyard. Cole Riker sat at the poker table, bottle at his elbow. His eyes gleamed, not from drink but from something meaner. A younger man leaned in close. "Was it our boys with that lantern?" Riker shook his head slowly. "No. Our boys don't waste time with signals. Whoever that was, they got their own game. Maybe against me. Maybe against Cutter." He smirked. "Either way, the town's ripe for taking." He raised the bottle in a mock toast. "By sunup, Dust Creek'll belong to whoever's bold enough to grab it." Eli saddled his horse, Raven, a black gelding with a scar down his flank from a bullet long past. The animal stamped, sensing the storm in more ways than one. Eli laid a hand on its neck. "Steady, Raven," he murmured. "Looks like we're stayin' the night." The preacher joined him at the hitching post. "You can't hold a town by yourself." Eli's eyes cut back to the church steps where Martha stood, shawl tugged tight, face pale but unbroken. Then to the boy, still watching him like a man waiting for the ending of a story he couldn't yet imagine. "Not by myself," Eli said. He tightened the cinch and checked the revolver at his side. 6 bullets, each one a decision that could never be unmade. The lantern blinked again, faint, far, but there. This time 3 times in a row. A different signal. A summons. Eli swung into the saddle. "Stay inside," he told the preacher. "Bolt the doors." Martha's voice carried across the street. "Where are you going?" "Where the trouble starts," Eli answered. The boy shouted, "Don't let 'em get you." Eli tugged the brim of his hat low. "That's never been their choice." He rode toward the ridge. Raven's hooves thudding against the hard-packed earth, sparks of lightning tearing at the horizon. Each stride carried him closer to the unseen hands shaping Dust Creek's fate. Behind him, the church bell tolled once, though no hand pulled the rope. Maybe the storm did it. Maybe something else. Either way, the sound followed him into the dark like a warning. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. The ridge loomed like a black spine against the crackling sky. Eli Cutter rode steady, Raven's breath steaming in the chill. Lightning split the mesa in crooked lines, throwing shadows that looked too alive to be stone. Halfway up, Eli slowed. Hoofprints in the mud. Fresh. More than one rider, maybe 5. Heavy horses, moving with purpose. He dismounted, crouched low, and pressed a hand to the earth. Still warm. They weren't ghosts. They were men, and close. The lantern signal had stopped, but the wind carried voices now low, urgent, hidden by the storm. Eli slid his revolver free, thumb brushing the worn cylinder. He stepped between boulders, coat flaring like wings in the gusts. A flash of lightning lit the ridge-top, and there they were, 4 riders, cloaked against the rain, gathered around a 5th man who held the lantern. Not Riker's crew. These men rode clean, saddles oiled, rifles polished. Not drunks, not miners, professionals. Eli called out, "You blinked me up here, best say why." The riders turned. One lowered his hood. A scar ran from ear to chin, and his eyes were pale, cold as cut marble. Eli knew that face. Silas Creed, once a lawman, once his partner, now a bounty hound who sold his soul to the highest purse. "Well, I'll be," Creed drawled, lantern glow catching his grin. "Eli Cutter, Dodge still wants your neck, don't they?" "Reckon half the territory does." "Funny," Eli said, steady. "I thought you'd be south, taking coin off railroad men. South paid me, sure, but Dust Creek's payin' better." Creed raised a gloved hand. The other riders shifted, rifles angling down. "Cole Riker hired us. Mob's just a smokescreen. Real plan's the bank. Come dawn, town's his, unless you're fool enough to stand in the way." Eli's jaw worked once, silent. He felt the badge heavy in his pocket. "The sheriff's dead. You mean to make the town follow him?" Creed laughed, rough as gravel. "I don't mean anything. I just collect. Men like Riker, they dream of crowns. Men like me," he tapped the rifle butt against his boot, "we sell the throne." Eli let the storm fill the pause. Thunder rolled like cannon fire. Raven shifted behind him, ears pinned. "You sent that lantern," Eli said. "You wanted me here." Creed's grin widened. "Had to see if you'd bite. And you did. Thing is, Cutter, you always did think you were the last good man left. But good men don't last long." Lightning struck the ridge behind them, fire bursting from a shattered pine. The horses screamed, rearing. Creed's men cursed, pulling at reins. In that chaos, Eli moved. Not to fire yet, but to vanish. He dropped low, rolled into the rocks, coat trailing like a shadow torn loose. Bullets sparked stone. Creed barked orders. "Find him! He's mine!" Eli crouched, revolver ready, heart beating with the storm. He hadn't chosen this fight, but Dust Creek was a tinderbox, and Silas Creed was the match. Down below, the town slept uneasy, unaware that its dawn was already bleeding on the ridge. And somewhere in the dark, Eli's past had come calling, wearing the face of a man he once called brother. Gunfire cracked against the rocks, sparks spraying like angry stars. Eli pressed himself low, heart drumming in rhythm with the storm. He counted 3 rifles on the ridge, Creed's orders snapping sharp through the rain. These weren't half-drunk miners, these were trained hands, steady, deliberate, hunters. A bullet shrieked past his ear, stone chipping into his cheek. Eli rolled behind a jagged outcrop, drew a slow breath, and let his hand find the rhythm it remembered, steady, measured, patient. A man didn't outshoot Creed's kind by firing wild. He outlasted them. "Cutter!" Creed's voice split the night. "You got no badge, no town, and no one at your back. Just lay that iron down, and I'll see you buried deep enough the coyotes won't find you." Eli answered with silence, the kind that made men nervous. Thunder bellowed. Lightning painted the mesa white. In that brief light, Eli saw Creed's men spread wide, 2 flanking left, 1 circling high. Creed himself in the center, with his lantern swinging like a lure. It hit Eli then. Creed wasn't chasing him, he was driving him, herding him downhill, toward Dust Creek. Toward the bank, Eli's jaw tightened. He slid his revolver back into its holster, vaulted onto Raven's back, and spurred hard. The horse leapt from cover, hooves pounding shale, sparks flying. Shots rang out, chasing him down the slope. But the storm favored him, whined, tore the aim from their rifles. Rain slicked the rocks under their boots. By the time Creed cursed, Eli was halfway down, Raven sure-footed, the town's lantern glow pulling him like a beacon. Martha Wyatt hadn't slept. She sat on the church steps, lamp in her lap, shawl damp with mist. When Raven thundered into view, she rose quick, relief warring with fear. "You went up there," she said. Eli swung down, breath raw in his chest. "Creed's here, brought men, Riker hired 'em." Her face paled. "Silas Creed? The one who rode with you?" Eli's eyes flickered just a moment, but she caught it. "Long time ago," he said. "What does he want?" "The bank, the town, everything Riker promised him." Martha's hands clenched around the lamp. "Then he'll burn what's left of Dust Creek." Eli nodded once. He reached into his coat, pulled the sheriff's badge, and held it out to her. Rain spotted the tarnished star, glimmering under the lamp. "This ain't mine to wear," he said, "but it might be the only thing that makes men listen when the sun comes up." Her voice was quiet. "You already made them listen." Eli closed his hand over the badge. The metal was cold, heavy as memory. Inside the saloon, Cole Riker slammed a fist against the poker table. Cards scattered, whiskey sloshed. "Where is Creed?" He should have brought Cutter's head by now. One of his men shifted uneasy. "Storm slowed 'em, maybe." Riker's glare cut him short. "Storm or not, dawn's comin'. If Creed don't hold Cutter, then Cutter'll hold the town. And I'll be damned if I let an outlaw wear that badge." He shoved away from the table, boots hammering across the boards. "Wake the men. We're not waitin' for sunup. Dust Creek bends tonight, or it burns." Back at the church, the preacher lit every lantern he had. Their glow fought the storm's shadows, spilling light across the pew where Sheriff Wyatt lay. Eli stood over him, badge in his palm, storm in his eyes. "Brother," he whispered to the dead man, "I ain't you, but I'll stand where you fell, for one night at least." Outside, the wind howled like a wolf, and in its teeth the hoofbeats came distant, many, drawing closer. Dust Creek was about to be tried by fire. The storm had blown itself ragged, leaving the air raw and damp. A grey light crept along the horizon, not yet day, but enough to paint the outlines of Dust Creek in silver and ash. Eli Cutter stood in the middle of Main Street, coat heavy with rain, hat brim low. The sheriff's badge gleamed against his chest. Now he hadn't meant to wear it, but the town needed something to cling to, and sometimes a symbol was stronger than a gun. Martha Wyatt rang the church bell herself. Its cry cut through the half-dark, summoning townsfolk from shuttered homes. One by one, they gathered, farmers with dirt still under their nails, miners with soot-stained hands, wives clutching shawls, children rubbing sleep from their eyes. Fear lay heavy on them, but hope flickered too, like coals refusing to die. The preacher raised a hand. "You asked for court," he said. "We'll hold it here, under God's eye and under the badge." Eli nodded once, voice low but steady. "Name your wrongs plain. Speak 'em aloud. We settle 'em with witnesses and truth. No fire, no rope, no mob." A murmur rippled through the crowd. One miner stepped forward, shoulders stooped. "Foreman cut our wages. Said it was the railroad's word." Another man barked. "Banker Harlan charged me twice for land I never saw." Voices tumbled after grievances stacked like kindling. For a moment it seemed the town might believe in law again, fragile though it was. Then hoofbeats thundered from the ridge. The crowd turned. Lanterns swung wild. Out of the storm's shadow came Silas Creed and his riders, cloaks dark, rifles slung low. Behind them, Cole Riker strode, his grin bright as a knife's edge. Riker raised his voice, mocking. "So this is your court? A wet outlaw wearing a dead man's star." Creed dismounted slow, boots sinking into the mud. His eyes met Eli's, pale and cold. "Morning, Cutter. Thought you'd save the town? You just gathered everyone nice and tidy for me." Eli's hand brushed the butt of his revolver. This town don't belong to Riker. Don't belong to you. It belongs to itself. Creed laughed, deep and bitter. Still preachin'. You always were the sermon, Eli. Me? I'm the collection plate. He raised his hand. Rifles leveled from the ridge. Gasps broke through the crowd. Mothers pulled children close. Men shifted, some reaching for axes or rusted pistols, others frozen in place. Eli's voice carried over the fear. You can walk away, all of you. This town don't need fire, don't need death. Riker spat into the mud. It needs strength, and strength ain't soft words. It's taking what you want, and making men too scared to take it back. He turned to the townsfolk, arms spread wide. You want your wages? You want your land? Follow me. I'll put the banker in the street, and you can judge him with your own hands. The mob shifted, restless again. Eli saw it in their eyes, that dangerous hunger, fed by years of being trampled. Justice or vengeance, the line was paper thin. Martha Wyatt stepped forward, shawl falling from her shoulders. You burn this town, and you burn the sheriff's memory. You burn your children's future. You burn yourselves. Her words cut sharper than steel, but Creed's men didn't lower their rifles. Eli took one step forward, boots sinking in the mud where Amos Wyatt had fallen. He drew the revolver, slow, deliberate, and cocked the hammer. The sound cracked louder than thunder. You want Dust Creek? He said. You'll take it over me. Silas Creed's grin thinned. Always knew it'd come to this. The dawn broke then, sun pushing through storm clouds, casting the street in blood-colored light. In that glow, law and chaos, brotherhood and betrayal, stood eye to eye, guns ready, the town holding its breath. The desert wind carried the silence before the gunshot. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. The silence shattered. A rifle cracked from the ridge, bullet whining past Eli's shoulder and splintering the boardwalk post behind him. Townsfolk screamed, scattering toward alleys and doorways. Mothers pulled children tight, men ducked behind barrels, the preacher dragging Martha back toward the church steps. Eli didn't flinch. His revolver was already raised, eyes locked on Silas Creed. But Creed hadn't fired. He stood calm in the mud, lantern glow long gone, his men bristling like wolves at his side. Steady, Creed barked. Don't waste lead unless it counts. Riker grinned wide, stepping forward. Hear that, folks. Your court's dismissed. He kicked mud onto the church steps. New law says you answer to me. From behind the banker, Harlan stumbled into view, dragged by one of Riker's men. His face was white, thin lips trembling. Please, please, I kept the record straight, I swear. Riker shoved him into the street. Here's your justice. Let's see how gentle your outlaw judge makes it. The crowd wavered. Rage and fear wrestled in every chest. A miner hurled a stone. It struck Harlan's shoulder, sending him sprawling. Another man raised a broken bottle. The mob stirred again, beast-like, ready to tear its prey apart. Eli fired once. The report thundered down Main Street, echoing off clapboard walls. The bullet struck the bottle clean, shattering it mid-air. Glass rained harmlessly to the mud. Enough! Eli's voice carried like the bell at high noon. You raise a hand against an unarmed man, you face me. The mob froze, startled by the shot, by the audacity. Even Riker blinked. Creed, though Creed only smiled, pale eyes bright with the old game. You never could resist playin' hero, Creed drawled. But heroes bleed same as villains. He stepped closer, mud sucking at his boots. Tell you what, Cutter, one shot, you and me. Winner takes the town. Loser gets buried with Wyatt. Eli felt the weight of the badge on his chest, cold against his skin. You think Dust Creek is a prize. I think it's people. He cocked his revolver again, thumb steady. But if it's me you want, then it's me you'll get. Martha's voice cut through the rising tension. Eli, don't. Her eyes locked on him, fierce and pleading. This isn't just about you. For a moment, Eli hesitated. He saw the boy with freckles watching from the church steps, fists clenched, waiting to see what justice looked like when it stood on two boots in the mud. Then he looked at Creed, his brother once, a stranger now. Lightning flared, thunder rolling like a drumbeat of fate. Eli stepped into the center of the street, exactly where the sheriff had fallen. He spun the revolver in his palm, grip sure, stance firm. "Call it, Creed," he said. The crowd held its breath. Riker licked his lips, eyes bright. Martha's hands shook at her sides. The preacher murmured a prayer under the storm's growl. Creed grinned. "On 3. 1. Boots shifted in the mud. 2. The storm hushed, as though the world itself leaned in. 3. The desert wind carried the silence after the gunshot. Smoke curled in the cold dawn air. Both men stood rigid, revolvers out, the echo of the shot still rolling across the mesa. For a heartbeat, no one knew who had fallen. Then Creed's hat slipped from his head, tumbling into the mud. He staggered, hand at his shoulder where Eli's bullet had torn through muscle. Blood seeped dark, but Creed laughed low, rough, a sound like gravel sliding down a dry well. "Still quick, Cutter," he said through his teeth. "But not quick enough to finish me." He lifted his revolver with his other hand, eyes blazing pale. Eli's gun was already up, but before either could fire again, Riker shouted, "Hold!" All eyes turned. Riker grinned like a fox that had sniffed a new hole. "Look at you two, old friends. Old enemies don't matter. You're both killers standing in the street with blood on your hands. Dust Creek don't need either of you." He swung to the mob, arms wide. "You see, the law's a lie. The badge is a toy. Men like Cutter and Creed fight each other. And you starve while they play gods. But me, I'll give you what you're owed." The crowd muttered, restless again. The banker lay sprawled in the mud, face grey with fear. Miners and ranch hands shifted, torn between vengeance and the fragile thread of order Eli had promised. Eli's voice cut through them. "You follow Riker. You'll get fire, rope, and graves, shallow enough the coyotes won't even dig." He stepped closer, revolver still trained on Creed but eyes on the people. "You stand with me. You'll get a fight. Hard, ugly, maybe bloody, but you'll get a town left standing." Martha Wyatt stepped forward, rain plastering her hair to her cheeks. "You've all lost something. My husband, your wages, your land. But if you give yourselves to Riker, you'll lose what little's left your souls." Her voice rang fierce. A widow's grief turned to steel. "Stand with the badge, not the mob." For a moment, silence. The kind that can tip either way. Then the freckled boy shouted, high and clear, "I stand with Cutter." A murmur rose. One miner lowered his rifle, nodding slow. A rancher followed, then another. The mob wavered, split down the middle like a log under the axe. Creed chuckled, clutching his wound. "Always did have a way with words, Eli, but words don't stop bullets." He leveled his revolver again, steady despite the blood soaking his sleeve. Eli raised his own. Time slowed, the air heavy with storm and choice. Two men once bound by trust, now set to end each other in the dirt of Dust Creek. But before the shot could ring, Riker barked an order. His men surged, rifles raised, boots pounding. Chaos tore through the street. The trial had ended. The war for Dust Creek had begun. The first volley ripped through Main Street like a hailstorm. Bullets chewed the wood of storefronts. Glass shattered. Women screamed as the town scattered into chaos. Eli dropped to one knee, firing back, each shot precise, driving Riker's men into cover. Creed's gun barked beside him, not at Eli, but at the mob that surged too close. For one strange, fleeting instant, Outlaw and Bounty Hound fought back to back, just like years ago. Eli felt it in his bones, the rhythm of Creed's fire, the way he always covered the left while Eli cut the right. Memory flared sharper than the muzzle flashes. "Never thought we'd stand the same dirt again," Creed muttered between shots. "Don't get used to it," Eli snapped. The preacher dragged townsfolk into the church, its whitewashed walls pocked with fresh holes. Martha Wyatt stood at the door, lamp in one hand, pistol in the other, voice ringing over the gunfire. "Inside, hurry!" Her defiance drew fire, but Eli's bullet dropped the man who aimed too close. Riker strode through the smoke, eyes wild, rifle in hand. "Burn it all!" he roared. One of his men smashed a lantern against the mercantile's porch. Flames licked upward, greedy and bright. Eli's stomach tightened. Dust Creek was dry kindling. If one building caught, the whole town would be ash by dawn. He sprinted through the gunfire, sliding across the mud, and kicked the burning lantern into the street before it spread. Bullets chased him, spitting mud at his boots. Creed covered him with sharp precision. "You always were too damn noble," he growled, dropping another rifleman with a clean shot. The townsfolk, emboldened by Martha's cries, began firing from windows and alleys. Old pistols, hunting rifles, even stones hurled from trembling hands. The mob splintered, drunk courage breaking against real resistance. Still, Riker pressed forward. He fired wild into the crowd, laughter twisting into a snarl. "You think you can stop me, Cutter? You think a tin star makes you a savior?" Eli raised his revolver, but before he could fire, Creed's shot cracked first. Riker staggered, rifle clattering into the mud. The bullet had carved his leg, not his chest. Creed had spared him on purpose. Eli's eyes snapped to his old partner. "Why not finish it?" Creed smirked, pale and bloodied. "Because a man like Riker bleeds the town better alive than dead. He'll crawl. He'll beg. People see him for what he is." Eli shook his head, rage burning. "Or he'll rise again and gut us all." Before Creed could answer, Riker roared in pain, clutching his wound. "Kill them! Every last one!" His voice cracked like a whip, dragging his remaining men into a final frenzy. The street became a storm of muzzle flashes, smoke curling thick, firelight dancing off wet boards. Children cried inside the church, the bell still swinging from stray shots. Eli planted himself in the center of Main Street, revolver in each hand, now his and one stripped from a fallen man. Creed stepped beside him, blood dripping down his sleeve, eyes blazing pale in the half-light. Together, they faced the charge. Two men broken by the past, bound again by necessity, standing where the sheriff had fallen. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. Smoke clung to Main Street like a shroud. Gunpowder stung the air, mingling with rain and the bitter tang of burning wood. The mob had thinned, but Riker's diehards pressed forward, driven more by fury than sense. Eli Cutter stood at the center of the street, boots planted where the sheriff had fallen, revolvers smoking in his hands. Creed limped beside him, blood soaking his coat, face pale but eyes fierce. The storm broke open then, sun clawing through torn clouds. Dawn spread a red-gold fire across the horizon, turning Dust Creek into a battlefield etched in bronze. Riker hobbled upright, blood streaking his leg, rage twisting his grin. "You think this town will follow you? They'll bury you in the same dust, Cutter. Law don't live here. Fear does." Eli's voice was steady, hard. "Fear built your mob, but it won't build Dust Creek." The townsfolk stirred at his words. Miners gripped pickaxes, ranchers raised their rifles. Martha Wyatt stepped forward from the church steps, shawl gone, pistol in her hand. Her voice cut sharp. "Riker, you brought death to our door. We'll see you judged alive or cold in the ground." Riker spat, lifted his rifle one last time. The barrel leveled at Martha. Eli moved faster than thought. His revolver barked once. The shot struck true. Riker's weapon spun from his hands, clattering into the mud. He staggered, clutching the wound, breath ragged. The mob faltered, their leader broken, their fury drained. Men dropped rifles, hands rising, fear returning where rage had ruled. One by one they backed away, retreating into alleys and shadows until only the fallen and the faint-hearted remained. Creed holstered his revolver slow, wincing at his wound. "You did it, Cutter." Eli shook his head. No. The town did. He turned to the people, raising the badge high. This belongs to Dust Creek, to every man, woman and child who calls it home. The sheriff's gone, but his stand ain't. The crowd murmured, voices lifting with something like hope. For the first time in a long time, Dust Creek felt like it might belong to itself. But Creed's eyes narrowed, pale and unreadable. You wear that star too long, Eli, and it'll bury you same as it buried Wyatt. Eli met his gaze. Maybe. But better buried in the dust than livin' as the flame that burns it down. Creed gave a thin smile, turned his back, and limped toward the ridge. We'll meet again. The townsfolk parted, watching him vanish into the fading storm. Eli looked once more at the place where the sheriff's hat had fallen, then at Martha, who held her ground steady as stone. He pinned the badge to his chest, not as a claim, but as a vow. Dust Creek would rise or fall with what came next, but for now, the dawn was theirs. Dust Creek woke under the weight of silence. Smoke still curled from broken windows, and the smell of burned kerosene lingered like a warning. Bodies lay covered in canvas sheets, the cost of one night's fury. Eli Cutter walked the length of Main Street slow, hat low, badge glinting dull on his chest. The townsfolk moved around him, some clearing debris, some tending to the wounded. They gave him space, yet their eyes followed. Not with fear, with expectation. Martha Wyatt swept ash from the church steps. Her hands trembled, but her chin stayed high. When Eli stopped near her, she met his gaze. You stood where Amos fell. You carried what he carried. Eli's voice was gravel, worn. I only bought you a dawn. What you do with the day that's yours. From behind, a boy's voice piped up. The freckled child, eyes wide, hat too big. You're the sheriff now. Eli crouched low, level with him. I'm just a man who made a choice. But you chose us, the boy whispered. Eli studied the small face, the hope burning there. He felt the badge heavy as stone against his chest. Slowly he rose. Then I'll hold it, he said, till someone better takes it. By noon, the town gathered again. Harlan the banker stood trembling before the crowd, his ledgers stacked high. The miners, the ranchers, even the widows spoke their claims. This time there was no mob, no torches, only voices. Eli presided, silent but steady, revolver holstered, badge bright. When justice bent too far toward vengeance, Martha's voice steadied it. When fear threatened to drown courage, the preacher lifted prayer. Piece by piece, Dust Creek found its footing, but Eli knew it was not done. On the ridge, beyond the storm's trail, Silas Creed still rode. A wound slowed him, but not forever. And men like Creed didn't forgive. As the sun bled westward, Eli stood at the edge of town, Raven saddled and waiting. He looked back once at the church bell, at Martha's figure framed in the doorway, at the people sweeping dust from their porches as if the act itself was a kind of faith. He touched the badge at his chest. I'll ride where trouble starts, he murmured, and I'll come back when Dust Creek calls. The wind lifted, carrying grit across the horizon. Eli swung into the saddle, hat brim cutting the last of the Sunday. He rode out slow, a lone figure against the firelit sky. The town watched until he was only dust and spurs on the horizon. The desert wind carried the silence after the gunshot. Night returned gentle, for the first time in many weeks. No mob thundered through the street. No gunfire split the air. Dust Creek lay bruised, but breathing. Lanterns glowed in windows as families gathered close, voices soft, almost reverent. The church bell hung crooked, cracked from stray bullets, yet it tolled once more under Martha Wyatt's hand. Not in mourning, not in warning, just to say the town still stood. Children chased each other in the mud, laughter breaking the silence. Miners patched holes in their roofs, ranchers hammered boards over splintered doors. Every nail driven was a prayer. Dust Creek would not be buried. Inside the saloon, glasses clinked without malice. A fiddle struck a slow, steady tune. The men who once roared for fire now muttered about wages and crops, shame heavy on their shoulders. Perhaps it was the beginning of something better. On the ridge, no lanterns blinked. Silas Creed had gone, carrying his wound and his grudge into the dark. His shadow stretched long, a promise of storms yet to come. The West had no shortage of men like him, and Eli Cutter knew it. Eli himself rode alone beneath the stars. The badge rested against his chest, weighty as the road ahead. He did not call himself sheriff, not yet. But the town had seen him wear it, and that meant something no outlaw could shake loose. He thought of Amos Wyatt, of the line a man draws in the dust and the cost of standing there. He thought of Martha, of her voice that rang truer than any gunshot, and he thought of the boy with freckles, who had shouted his name when all others were silent. The trail stretched west, endless as the sky. Somewhere, another town waited, another mob stirred, another sheriff fell. Eli Cutter rode steady, spurs glinting, dust rising in his wake. A man bound not by law written on paper, but by the oaths carved into his own bones. Behind him, Dust Creek learned to stand. Ahead, the frontier waited, vast and unforgiving, and the desert wind carried the silence after the gunshot.